Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good morning to this, the Thursday edition of Vuka Nazo, only on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Welcome to it. We're about to have a look at the morning headlines, things that I believe you should be paying attention to as you start your news day. But before we do that, remember, you can find me on my website. That's at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. There, of course, you can pledge some support to the channel. Just scroll to the bottom, find your preferred payment method, and please contribute 100 Rand a month towards the show. It helps us grow and hire the people who can professionalize the show as we grow it. Now, with that being said, how about we end the jibber jabber and get straight into the news? All right, I take you this morning to eThekwini, Durban, where, of course, you might be one of those residents if you live in the city. We might still be sitting in darkness after last night's massive explosion at the Klaarwater major substation, where, as I mentioned, during what was a very odd evening too, of almost gale force berg winds, those hot winds that, very odd conditions last night. A explosion then followed that, and as I said, the Klaarwater major substation plunging over half of Durban into darkness. Credit where it's due, the eThekwini municipality was relatively quick in communicating what exactly had gone wrong on social media, in particular, mentioning, of course, as I said, that the Klaarwater substation, which basically transmits about 275 kilovolts, I think is the metric used, of electricity to the city, had gone up effectively in a mini explosion, if you will, which you saw in those images. What a sight that was. I mean, it kind of looked like I'm sure residents of around that part of the world probably thought they were in the middle of Ukraine and Russia, and that the nuclear bombs had gone off. I jest about it now, but it would have been a very scary sight last night, especially with the weather and then compounded with that particular event. News 24, as I said, reporting that the power has been restored, much to the credit of eThekwini, in most parts of the city, as it reads. The eThekwini municipality says electricity has been restored in most parts of eThekwini from Tuesday's major power outage. Around 50% of the households in Durban were left without power following an explosion at the Klaarwater major substation. Now, the municipality says the outage was caused by a trip out at the substation, a key supply point to the city from Eskom, end of quote. As I said, kudos to the eThekwini municipality for being on the ball and being relatively quick in restoring this. However, there are still some questions that need to be asked. Now, and there's three questions I want to leave with you, because it seems to be glossed under the carpet now. Number one, how is it possible that over 50% of the city can go out from one major substation? That seems like a major point of failure, a major single point of failure, to have the distribution of electricity be organized and arranged in that way. And again, I ask these questions as someone who is a layman, who knows nothing about electricity, and is simply asking these questions from maybe those who are in the know. How is it possible that a city, a metro, if you will, of 3 million people, half of whom receive electricity over half of whom from one substation? That seems like a major single point of failure that has to be addressed at an infrastructure level. The second question is, what was the cause of the outage? I mean, it's all fine and well for the city to communicate that its technicians were on the ground and they assessed the damage and yada, 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 but communicating something like this also should be letting us know what was the cause of this particular outage, because that has implications on answering the question, will it happen again? Now, the rumor mill in the city, of course, is going wild, where the allegations is it was yesterday's freakish weather of the hot berg winds and, they're gusting that somehow affected this particular major substation. And if that's the case, it kind of begs the question, or asks the question, on the vulnerability of the infrastructure of eThekwini or Durban, where if a substation like that one had received even more extensive damage, are you saying that the city of 3 million people would have had more days upon days, maybe even weeks of blackouts, or being in the dark? These are questions that have to be asked of the eThekwini municipality. And the third, of course, is maintenance. For as much as, people are trying to ascribe the rumor mill, at least, this to being, it's from the freakish storm, whatever the case may be, it does beg the question, are we maintaining our infrastructure adequately in eThekwini? These questions have to be asked, even though you're now happy and the power is back. The question is, can something like this happen again? All right, I take you now to Pretoria and perhaps even Cape Town. That's definitely where the politicians have their official residence. Remember, the same people who enjoy those great perks of, as they fail us insofar as providing electricity, they reward themselves by giving themselves generators, solar panels, and the like. So they insulate themselves using our money from the decisions, the bad decisions, and the bad outcomes that they put on us. Those same politicians are now going one step further. Now, of course, I saw this in The Independent, which basically mentioned the following. That cash-strapped South Africans are now expected to part with even more cash at the end of this month, following the reported removal of the 5,000 Rand utilities cap for ministers. End of quote. Of course, that's it. You just read it right there. Ministers now, in their ministerial handbook, that's the handbook of goodies that they enjoy, perks and privileges, are removing the 5,000 Rand cap on what the state will pay for the utilities bills at the official residences of ministers. That's both in Pretoria and in Cape Town. Thus, really, it's free reign. They can use as much electricity, as much water as they please, and guess who pays for it? That's right, you, the ordinary South African who is at the moment struggling to make ends meet. You, the ordinary South African who, if you walk into any grocery shop, you're seeing more of us do what I like to call the Bamba Yega, the take it and leave it, if you will, thing where you take something which you ordinarily used to buy, look at the price, realize that it's out of your pocket range, and you put it back. That's what we are going through as we become progressively poorer. You'll remember in a previous episode of Vuka Nazo, I mentioned to you the Momentum study, which shows that ordinary South Africans are becoming poorer. You, that ordinary South African, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African who is becoming poorer, are expected to fund the lavish lifestyles of the politicians, their families, and the political elites in this country, giving them boundless, endless amounts of utilities that you and I simply can't afford. Now, bear in mind, the price of those utilities, if you look on average, have risen sharply over the years. Indeed, over the last decade, we've seen an almost 370% increase in the price of electricity, for example, as Eskom has been pushing those increases in what they charge for electricity. You and I, who can barely afford these resources, are giving politicians free reign over them. So that what do we do then in this situation? Two things. Number one, we've got to begin to organize ourselves at a local level to build resilience and independence, greater independence at a community level. I'm not talking about KwaZulu-Natal independence or Western Cape independence, which are bigger, loftier goals, for as much as I support them. I'm talking here at a local level where you talk to your neighbors, you guys rally each other, you build a sense of unity. Maybe you say, we're going to form a community safety group, or we're going to get together, form a community stokvel where we can afford to buy solar panels so that we can power up our own street lights when there is a failure, like load shedding. Whatever the goal may be, unity, you organize and you build around this, see how it's done, and of course you mobilize the resources to make all of this happen. The second thing you do as a community, you then look to 2024 and you vote these people out. All right, time of course is now running out for South Africa. That's through the Treasury and Parliament in particular, to pass the necessary legislation required by the international community to combat money laundering and crimes of that nature. Of course, the Financial Action Task Force, that's an international initiative established to combat money laundering, had published, you remember, a while back, the mutual evaluation report that had basically pointed out that South Africa has major weak spots in investigating and dealing with crimes of that nature, and because of that had warned that if they don't pass legislation and improve their systems by February of 2023, South Africa as a country would face what they call grey listing, which is of course a massive implication, or rather massive outcome that the country should avoid. What is grey listing? You're probably wondering. Let me just quickly read from this piece in ENS Africa that reminds us exactly what grey listing can do to a country. Now, if South Africa does not implement the necessary measures to remedy the weak spots identified in the FATF, that's the Financial Action Task Force, before the deadline, the consequences are dire as mentioned. According to the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, a grey-listed country can expect an average decline in capital inflow of as much as 7.6% of GDP, a decrease in foreign direct investment of 3% of GDP, and of course a decrease in portfolio inflows of 2.9%. But here's where it gets really scary. For a country like ours, which depends on being able to borrow money at good rates, being grey-listed would likely further impair the economy's links to the global financial system, raise the country's cost of capital, that's borrowing, and create an additional incentive for offshore companies to deal with South Africa, end of quote. That, of course, would make doing business in the country exceptionally difficult and indeed make things more miserable for you and me. Now, where are we at the moment insofar as the process of passing that legislation? Well, there is a bitchy catfight between Treasury and Parliament at the moment, with each blaming the other for delays. EWN writes about their recent tiff, where they basically mentioned the write-up goes as follows. Now, EWN points out that the General Laws Amendment Bill to combat money laundering was only introduced to Parliament in August, and it is still a long way off from passing through all the hoops before it can become law. Next month, Treasury will have to meet with the FATF to update on its progress. That meeting will be awkward, especially because there's been very little progress. And the Financial Intelligence Centre's Pete Smith said that unless the law was already in force by the February deadline, South Africa was unlikely to avoid being grey listed, end of quote. So that in and of itself should tell you exactly where things are going. We are in for a very, very tough time as politicians and the political elites faff and dilly-dally when the rest of the international community, which will not give us leeway, is basically saying, where are the measures to fight money laundering and crimes of that nature? This is what happens when you have politicians in power who basically, for the longest of time, were very happy for South Africa's law enforcement to not have the requisite capacity to deal with these sort of crimes. Why? Because the politicians themselves, in cahoots with political elites, remember, for example, Zuma and the Guptas were doing allegedly these sort of crimes. Of course, they wouldn't have wanted law enforcement to have the capacity or even laws to be able to adequately deal with these sort of crimes. That whole corrupt nexus is coming back to bite us in the bum. All right, folks, we end today's episode of Vuka Nazo here. Let me know what you think about the stories, of course. It's always very interesting to get your feedback. Remember, as I always forget to sometimes mention, you watch the show from 7 a.m. every morning, but in the afternoons, you can catch my friends over at The Daily Friend, where they'll release their podcast and you can see what the news day was and get a roundup from them. You'll find them, of course, at www.dailyfriend.co.za. Speaking about websites, you'll find me at my website at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. There, of course, you can catch up with the latest stuff that you may have missed on the show. With that being said, if you want to find us on social media, all of our information is either down there if you're watching on YouTube, or up there if you're watching on Facebook. And of course, make sure that you, if you're watching on YouTube in particular, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so that every weekday from 7 a.m. you're notified when Vuka Nazo is on your screens. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.